Imagine a world where some nations dictate the rules while quietly breaking them for their own gain. Imagine being told what you can buy, who you can trade with, and which partners you can choose, while the very same voices lecture you from a pedestal built on hypocrisy. That world is no longer acceptable, and India is proving that the days of silent compliance are over. India's sovereign right to choose its partners has been at the very center of Jaishankar's message to the world, especially as debates around Russian oil imports have intensified. The foundation of this argument is simple yet powerful. A nation as large, diverse, and strategically significant as India cannot and should not be expected to surrender its independence in decision-making just because of external pressure. For decades, India has maintained a principle of strategic autonomy, whether during the Cold War when it pursued non-alignment or in today's complex multipolar world where every choice is scrutinized. Jaishankar consistently emphasizes that India will not let its policies be shaped in Washington, Brussels, or Moscow, but will instead be determined in New Delhi, with the interests of 1.4 billion people at the forefront. When Trump or other Western leaders raise objections to India's ties with Russia, Jaishankar's rebuttal is grounded in sovereignty, the undeniable right of a nation to decide what serves its people best, whether in terms of energy, defense, or diplomacy. This notion of sovereignty also carries a strong moral weight. India has often been subjected to lectures from powerful nations who themselves engage freely in actions that serve their interests. The hypocrisy becomes glaring when Western capitals expect India to stop buying affordable Russian oil while they themselves continue trade in other forms or seek alternative routes that indirectly benefit from the same sources. In this sense, Jaishankar's defense of sovereignty is not only about rejecting interference, but also about exposing the imbalance in global narratives. He presents sovereignty not as isolation, but as self-respect, an insistence that India will not compromise its independence under the guise of partnership. For a country that is projected to be one of the largest economies in the near future, maintaining this autonomy is not optional. It is essential for stability, growth, and global credibility. Sovereignty in the Indian context is tied directly to its democratic identity. A government elected by the people has a duty to protect their interests above foreign demands. If cheap energy from Russia keeps inflation under control, sustains industry, and secures livelihoods, then India must pursue it. For Jaishankar, yielding to foreign criticism would mean betraying that democratic mandate. This is why his message resonates not just domestically, but also globally, especially with nations in the global south that have long faced similar pressures. India's assertion of sovereignty becomes a model for how emerging powers can stand firm, negotiate on their own terms, and refuse to be dictated to by traditional power centers. The reality of energy security is one of the most compelling points that Jaishankar has consistently brought forward when addressing criticism of India's continued purchase of Russian oil. For a country of India's size and scale, with a population of more than 1.4 billion people and an economy that is rapidly expanding, energy is not a luxury, but an absolute necessity. India is already the world's third largest consumer of energy, and its demand continues to rise as urbanization, industrialization, and modernization accelerate across the nation. In this context, Jaishankar has argued that it would be irresponsible for any government to ignore affordable sources of energy just because of political expectations from the West. India's dependence on imports to meet more than 80% of its crude oil needs means that stability and affordability in this sector directly affect its growth, inflation, and ultimately, the livelihood of its people. When Russian oil offers India a price advantage, it translates into savings that protect consumers and industries at home, ensuring the economy remains stable even when global markets are volatile. This argument becomes even more pressing when one looks at the double standards applied by Western nations. Despite their criticism of India's purchases from Russia, Many Western countries have continued importing Russian energy through indirect channels, whether via third-party nations or by exploiting loopholes in sanctions. This duplicity has not gone unnoticed, and Jaishankar has been forthright in pointing it out. He stresses that if Europe could prioritize its energy security during the initial months of the Ukraine conflict, then India certainly has the same right to prioritize its needs without being questioned. This is not an act of defiance for its own sake, but rather a pragmatic approach to ensuring that the country's economic growth is not crippled by rising fuel prices or shortages. Another important dimension of this reality is that India's energy strategy is not confined to just one source or one partner. While Russian oil provides a cushion, India continues to diversify its energy basket by engaging with the Middle East, the United States, and renewable energy partners. This balance demonstrates that India is not blindly dependent, but is exercising smart choices that maximize its resilience. Jaishankar's defense of energy security, therefore, goes beyond the immediate context of Russian oil. It is about the long-term principle that no responsible government can allow its citizens to suffer economic shocks simply to satisfy geopolitical posturing from abroad. It is a reminder that energy decisions are fundamentally about survival, growth, and sovereignty, and India will continue to pursue them unapologetically. The issue of Western hypocrisy is one of the most striking elements in Jaishankar's defense of India's policies on Russian oil and its broader foreign relations. For decades, Western countries have acted according to their own strategic and economic interests, often without hesitation or concern for the consequences imposed on others. Yet, when India follows the same principle of pursuing what best serves its people, it is quickly criticized and lectured. Jaishankar has not shied away from exposing this contradiction. He highlights how Europe, at the peak of the Ukraine crisis, continued to import vast amounts of Russian energy because its economies could not survive without it. The West justified these actions by claiming necessity, but when India makes similar choices, the response is condemnation rather than understanding. This is the very double standard that Jaishankar calls out, a narrative where Western nations reserve for themselves the right to act pragmatically while expecting others to make sacrifices for political symbolism. This hypocrisy extends beyond just energy. The West has long built relationships with regimes that suited its interests, regardless of whether they aligned with democratic values or international norms. From supporting authoritarian allies in the Middle East to engaging in wars that destabilized entire regions, Western powers have consistently chosen convenience over principle. Yet, when India insists on buying affordable oil to protect its economy, it is accused of undermining global efforts. Jaishankar's sharp rebuttal is that every nation has the right to make decisions in line with its national interests, and India will not apologize for doing exactly what the West has done for generations. The difference now is that India has the strength, confidence, and global standing to push back against such moral grandstanding and expose it for what it really is: selective criticism designed to maintain influence. For India, calling out this hypocrisy is not just about defending itself. It is also about shaping a more honest global discourse. Jaishankar's stance resonates strongly with other countries in the global south that have often been pressured into compliance by wealthier nations. By standing firm, India sends a clear message that emerging powers will no longer be silent when subjected to double standards. It is a demand for equality in international relations, where decisions are respected rather than judged through a Western lens. This boldness in exposing hypocrisy not only strengthens India's credibility, but also reshapes the global narrative, positioning New Delhi as a voice of fairness and realism in an increasingly divided world. India's balancing act in global politics has become one of the most defining aspects of its foreign policy under Jaishankar's leadership, and it reflects both confidence and pragmatism in navigating an increasingly polarized world. On one side, there is pressure from the West, particularly the United States and its allies, to align more closely with their positions on issues such as Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. On the other side, India maintains a long-standing partnership with Russia that stretches back decades, encompassing defense, energy, and strategic cooperation. Instead of succumbing to the expectation of choosing one camp over the other, Jaishankar has made it clear that India will continue engaging with both sides on its own terms. This is not an act of indecision, but a deliberate assertion of multipolar diplomacy, where India refuses to be confined to binary choices. It reflects the maturity of a nation that understands its growing weight in the international system and is unwilling to compromise its interests for the sake of pleasing others. This balancing act is visible in how India has managed to maintain strong defense ties with Russia, ensuring the continuity of crucial military supplies while simultaneously deepening its strategic partnership with the United States through initiatives like the Quad, technology cooperation, and defense agreements. Instead of being viewed as contradictory, Jaishankar frames this approach as the reality of an interconnected world where interests are diverse and cannot be confined to rigid blocks. India's ability to sustain relationships with both Washington and Moscow sends a strong signal that it is emerging as an independent pole in global politics, rather than a junior partner to any power. This independence has also earned India respect among countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, many of which share the same aspiration of not being drawn into great power rivalries, but instead pursuing their own national interests. The strength of this balancing act lies in the credibility it gives India as a responsible player in international affairs. By maintaining open channels with both sides, India is positioned to act as a bridge in times of global crisis rather than as a partisan actor. Jaishankar emphasizes that this strategy is not about opportunism, but about stability, ensuring that India can withstand external shocks while contributing to dialogue and peace. In a world increasingly marked by confrontation, India's balanced diplomacy demonstrates how a nation can rise in influence without being trapped in the agendas of others. This calculated independence is shaping India's global image as a decisive, confident, and indispensable power in the multipolar order that is steadily emerging. The message to Washington is perhaps one of the most defining aspects of Jaishankar's rhetoric when responding to criticism over India's engagement with Russia, particularly its oil imports. His stance makes it clear that India will not be treated as a subordinate power or a passive ally expected to follow instructions. Instead, India expects to be treated as an equal, with its concerns respected and its interests acknowledged. This sentiment represents a major shift in global dynamics, where the United States has traditionally been accustomed to partners aligning with its policies without much resistance. Jaishankar's words challenge this mindset directly, reminding Washington that India is no longer the India of the past, but a rising power with its own voice, one that cannot be silenced or dismissed. What makes this message more powerful is the dignity with which it is delivered. Jaishankar does not frame India's position in terms of confrontation, but in terms of principle. He stresses that if America can prioritize its energy needs, trade policies, and strategic alliances, then India has every right to do the same. This is not about rejecting the United States, but about demanding mutual respect. By making this point repeatedly, Jaishankar sends a subtle but firm warning to Washington. Cooperation with India will only succeed if it is based on equality, not hierarchy. This approach also reflects the confidence of a country that has established itself as one of the fastest-growing economies and as a crucial player in technology, security, and global governance. The old paradigm where India was seen as dependent on Western approval no longer exists, and Jaishankar makes sure that Washington understands this reality. The message is carefully designed to strengthen India's negotiating position. By drawing clear boundaries, India makes it evident that it cannot be coerced into policy shifts through pressure or criticism. This in turn forces the United States to reconsider its approach, because losing India's partnership in the Indo-Pacific and on global issues would come at a cost. Jaishankar essentially reminds Washington that India's cooperation is valuable and must be earned through respect and recognition, not demanded as an obligation. This assertiveness has resonated widely within India and across other nations in the global South, who see in New Delhi a model of how to engage with powerful countries without surrendering sovereignty. The message to Washington, therefore, is not merely about oil or Russia, but about reshaping the foundation of India-US relations into one of genuine partnership and parity. A call for fairness in the global order lies at the heart of Jaishankar's message whenever he addresses criticism from Western powers, and it represents more than just India's defense of its own policies. His argument is that the international system cannot continue functioning on the basis of selective rules that favor a few powerful nations while expecting the rest of the world to comply unquestioningly. For decades, developing countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America have been pressured into aligning with decisions that were never made with their interests in mind. From economic sanctions to military interventions and trade restrictions, the world order has often been shaped by the priorities of the West, leaving the global South with limited agency. Jaishankar challenges this imbalance by asserting that India, as a major emerging power, will no longer accept a framework where fairness is absent. His words are not merely about rejecting interference, but about redefining what equality in international relations truly means. This call for fairness becomes particularly evident in the debate around Russian oil. When India is criticized for purchasing affordable energy, Jaishankar responds by pointing out that Western countries have long engaged in similar practices without facing moral scrutiny. Fairness, therefore, demands consistency. If Europe can protect its energy security, then so can India. The principle extends beyond energy into climate change, trade, and global governance. Developing nations are often asked to make sacrifices in the name of global responsibility, while developed countries delay or dilute their own commitments. By demanding fairness, Jaishankar is giving voice to a broader frustration felt by many countries that have been treated as secondary players in shaping global rules. India's stance becomes a rallying point, encouraging others to insist on equal treatment and transparency in how international expectations are set. At its core, this call is about building a multipolar world where no single country or bloc can dictate terms to everyone else. Jaishankar's message signals that power must be shared and respect must be mutual if the global order is to remain stable. India's rise, therefore, is not only about asserting its own interests, but also about paving the way for a system where all voices matter, not just those of the richest or strongest nations. By positioning itself as both a defender of sovereignty and a champion of fairness, India is shaping its identity as a leader for the global South. Jaishankar's insistence on fairness is thus more than rhetoric. It is a vision for transforming global politics into one where equality, justice, and mutual respect form the foundation of international cooperation. This is not just about oil, not just about Russia, and not just about America's discomfort with India's choices. This is about sovereignty, dignity, and fairness in a world that has for too long been tilted in one direction. Jaishankar's message is clear. India will not bow, it will not apologize, and it will not compromise the interests of its people for someone else's politics. The balance of power is shifting, the old order is crumbling, and a new multipolar reality is emerging. In that reality, India stands tall, unapologetic, and unafraid, a voice for itself and for every nation that dares to demand respect.